So within the next few minutes, I just wanted to update you a little bit on drug delivery concepts in BTK arteries. We heard already quite a bit on it, and I think if we look at the situation, and we've seen that today very clearly, we all know that we are dealing specifically with long lesions in the below-the-knee arteries, and we have to expect a very high restenosis rate during the first months after the procedures, actually during a critical phase for wound healing. I think we all know that sometimes we are opening up arteries in a very nice way, but then 3 months later we get almost the same picture like before the intervention. And of course, we were all a bit disappointed that drug-coated balloons in the IMPACT DEEP study didn't show the results which we hoped to achieve with this multicentric trial. But I must say, personally, I still believe that drug delivery is probably the most promising way to go for the below-the-knee arteries, and specifically a balloon-based drug delivery solution might be the most promising tool because of the length limitations with implants which have been addressed. So we're still struggling a little bit to understand. Marianne addressed a lot of these issues with the IMPACT DEEP study, why they didn't show the results, and why in our center, for instance, and also in other centers, we had seen an advantage of the drug-coated balloon technology. It's difficult to explain, but one thing was very clear. We looked at a very early time point at 3 months, where we had already seen, after balloon dilatation, very high restenosis rates, similar to the study I just showed you by IDA. And in the trials, these angiographic follow-ups were done much later. They were only done on cohorts and on sub-cohorts, and also with a relatively bad compliance rate. So that may also explain some of the differences. Of course, we also looked when the data of the IMPACT DEEP study came out on our own experience, because we were also concerned about the safety issue, and we basically analyzed patients which we had treated by the time with drug-coated balloon technology. We had again here 195 patients with very long lesions, and we were basically looking at our amputation rate, and at least in our practice, the major amputation rate was only 3.9%, which we think is very encouraging and was lower than reported in the randomized trial. That may have to do something with the cohorts, of course, of patients we treated, but at least we found this reassuring. Nevertheless, there have been lessons learned how devices need to be improved. One was very clear, and we were all not aware at the time when we were using the devices that that the first generation devices, for instance, were coated in an inflated stage, in an unfolded stage. And therefore, a lot of the surface was not coated with paclitaxel. So in fact, there were a lot of also improvements to be made on the production side. And I must say, personally, I'm very happy to see that also Medtronic now made significant improvements to the device and is back on track with an early study on an improved DCB device in the below-the-knee circulation within the first in-man study. I think that's very good for the field, and I think it's eventually potentially a good hope for our patients that we can come back with these technologies. So while this is restarting, in terms of addressing ongoing projects, we have to say that the most relevant ongoing project in the below-the-knee space is clearly the Lutonix IDE trial, which, as you know, is a 2-to-1 randomized multicentric trial, which now changed the clinical endpoint, primary endpoint, to a 6-month endpoint of limb salvage and primary patency. There will be up to 840 patients randomized at 75 global sites. So it's a study which is really demanding in terms of finding the right patients for enrollment. This is the study scheme. Patients are undergoing a pre-dilatation and are then randomized 2-to-1 into the test arm and the control arm. And here again, we are of course looking at safety which is mainly freedom from amputation and major reintervention, and on efficacy at 6 months time point. So what's the current status of this? That may not be absolutely up to date, but around just above 380 patients are currently randomized. So far, the amputation rate in the overall cohort was 3.2%. So again, in a very low and expected range. And of course, there's a very close oversight of the study by the data safety monitoring committee, which has met, I think, meanwhile 13 times, and they recommended always the continuation of the study with no modification. So there seems to be a good reassurance that this is a safe project, but it will probably still take some time until we see results. In the meantime, we can say that there is in parallel also a registry with the Lutonix drug-coated balloon, which is also a multicentric register with less strict inclusion criteria. And Dr. Lichtenberg reported at the LINC meeting some interim results, which I want to show you briefly. Up to 500 patients are eventually going to be enrolled here, and they are also followed up with clinical endpoints for safety and efficacy. You can see here some of the patient demographics. Majority of patients were in Rutherford category 5, and some patients also with claudication, but majority with critical limb ischemia. Diabetic patients, almost 60%. You can see here the target lesion length in this registry was 10 centimeters, the mean target lesion length, so really including long lesions. We can see here the freedom from primary safety events at the 6 months time point for the first patients. You can see that these rates are very encouraging, and actually 94% freedom from any safety events were reported at 6 months. If you look specifically, the rate of freedom from major amputation was 95.2%, and freedom from re-interventions for thrombotic occlusions was, for instance, 96%. So I think very encouraging results here in terms of efficacy. We can say freedom from target lesion revascularization at 6 months in this initial analysis was just above 89%, also probably an encouraging value, particularly if we consider that really some very severe patients were included. That's also a case done by Dr. Lichtenberg, which he showed during the LINC meeting. So a patient really with extensive tissue loss, and you can see here the situation after the revascularization, and then a good progression of wound healing, which of course takes quite some time. And I think this is a typical case where we really need long-term patency to ensure wound healing and eventual achieve limb salvage. Well, just maybe as a follow-up to the live case, I want to bring up in terms of other ongoing drug delivery projects in the below-the-knee area, again, the concept of adventitial microinfusion of drug with the bullfrog device. You've seen the device. It has this little needle here, which basically pokes into the artery wall and allows delivery of any drug or drug combination into the adventitial space. And this is done, as shown in the live case, in the mix with contrast. So currently we are using 20% contrast and 80% of the drug to visualize basically the delivery of the drug into the vessel wall. Well, it was already addressed that, of course, in theory, you can inject any possible drug which could interfere with the restenosis process. For the time being, we are using dexamethasone. It has been studied in the DANCE study in the SFA, and there are currently 2 projects ongoing in the below-the-knee arteries, and there is an interesting dose-finding study with sirolimus derivate. Just briefly on dance, there was a study conducted in the United States in the SFA, 157 patients with atherectomy treated and 124 with PTA, and then dexamethasone was basically added after the treatment. I want to go quickly over that. Lesion length was about 7 to 8 centimeters, and we can see here in terms of efficacy, was really encouraging. You can see here the patency curves of the atherectomy group and the PTA group, both in the above 80% at one year, and freedom from target lesion revascularization, almost 90% in both groups. So that's kind of reassuring. As I mentioned, ongoing trials in the below the knee area, same LIMBO atherectomy, with George Adams being the principal investigator, where patients after atherectomy and below the knee arteries are randomized 1-to-1 to receive dexamethasone or control. And I have the pleasure to lead the study in Europe, also 120 patients after PTA of balloon BTK Arteries, randomized 1-to-1. And so these two trials are ongoing. I think the US study is almost enrolled, and in Europe we still have a certain way to go. And finally, I want to mention that this very interesting study is currently ongoing in the United States, the TANGO study, basically using temsirolimus, sirolimus derivate, which is basically used in 60 patients, which are randomized into controls and a low dose and a higher dose drug delivery group. And so it's going to be interesting whether this can lead towards a clinical application of a sirolimus derivate in the below the knee arteries. Thank you.